Kallan ran down the corridor lit with torches. After descending the flight of stairs where the room widened, she slowed and approached the great hall. Standing just beyond the threshold, she peered around the stone door frame. The fire pits were cold, leaving the throne submerged in darkness. The tables laden with devoured carcasses, food remnants, and barrels and flasks of mead were empty. She could easily see where only moments ago most of her warmen had passed out at the table or onto the floor. Quietly, Kallan slipped into the hall, crossing the large room as she swept her gaze from tables to the throne. Reaching the end of the room, she peered into the hall that would take her to the stables, the barracks, or the courtyard. Silence found her, and she stopped on the threshold. To reach the stables from the barracks, the Dark One would have to take this hall. Kallan swallowed a chill that tasted too much like fear. No matter the training, her scythe, her spells, he managed to outfit her every time. Each of their battles ended with a close brush with death and an impasse that forced them both to bail. Tightening her grip on her dagger, Kallan forced her breath steady and left the shelter of the great hall, slipping into the corridor toward the barracks. The abandoned barracks housed a constant chill that always swept in from the prisons below. The prisons had been the oldest and first mines dug ages before by the Dark Far. The first stones of Lorlenalin had been built from the slab pulled from the mountain. When the mines dried up, they were made into prisons, and the old counting room, the barracks. The guard was dead, slumped against the wall with his eyes wide open. Blood stained the side of his mouth. Giving no thought to the armory, Kallan yanked open the heavy iron door, eager to secure her bartering stone. The deafening clang of the door and the stale silence left an uneasy sickness that twisted her insides. She wasn't alone. Kallan flicked her wrist, summoning a small ball of red flame that danced in her palm. With flame in one hand and dagger in the other, Kallan began the long descent into the black halls. Pale orange flame from the dying torches lined the passages that snaked their way through the labyrinth. Moisture collected on the walls and streaked the stone with minute streams of cold water. Without a guide, she forced her way through, finding her way into the impervious dark. Adrenaline sharpened her senses as Kallan followed the path through the winding corridors. She turned a corner and descended a series of steps. Her pace slowed, knowing they were there. She could feel it in her blood. The foreign, unmistakable scent of an earth that didn't belong to Lorlenalin sent her heart pounding. Her foot peeked from beneath her hem as she grazed the stone with her heel. Ensuring complete silence, she made her way into the bowels of the city. The usual gusts of cold rolled up the steps, chilling her bare legs beneath her chemise. Resisting the urge to shiver, she tightened her grip on her dagger. At the base of the steps, the hall forked to the left and the right. If she took the right path, it would lead her on into an open room where two additional corridors branched out. Only one would take her to Rune. Her heart beat painfully as she neared the last step, her back pressed against the damp stone. She could wait here for them to find her and counter defensively, or avoid the delay and seize the offensive before they knew she was there. Kallan slowed her breathing. Tension twisted her insides. 1 breath. 2. She knew they were there. 3. Kallan pivoted around the corner and fired the sage flame before taking aim. A sharp crack echoed the thud of a body striking the stone. 5, she assessed. One lay unconscious behind the four still standing. The Liasifa warrior on her right charged. With a graceful sweep, Kallan slashed her scythe flame across his face. His hand flew up, grasping a cutlass, stumbling back several paces. Balancing her weight evenly on her bare feet, Kallan fired his scythe flame into a second warrior, charging her left. But the first rebounded, undeterred by the cauterized laceration that stretched from the right side of his mouth to his left eye. Kallan raised her dagger and met a sword. Eldingstone screamed against iron as the blade snapped in two. She fired a blast to the right, then to the left, sending both warriors to the wall, unconscious just as a great sword came down from the front. The metal's deafening scream followed a sudden silence, and her body reverberated beneath the strength of her opponent. Behind him, her last opponent stood with an axe at the ready. Sweat from her palm weakened her grip, requiring both hands on her handle. His great sword stood strong against her elding dagger, drawing Kallan's gaze through their locked blades. Kallan froze. Between their hilts, the cool black eyes of the Dark One stared back at her, sending a chill down to her feet. His all-too-familiar scar glistened with sweat above his right brow. He smiled, stirring a sudden irritation she couldn't explain. "Your Majesty," he purred. His voice was like honey. Kallan stared at her own hateful grimace reflected in his eyes. "He knows." With a roar, Kallan pushed her dagger against the berserker. He stumbled back, raising his blade again, while behind him, the Liasifa raised his axe for the fatal blow, but she was ready for them both. Pouring her scythe flame into the elding handle, Kallan pushed the fire through the blade as she swung her dagger. The last Liasifa was just out of range, but the fire reached where her blade could not, as she swung one steady swing from right to left. The lang of sage flame whipped through the air, cursing aloud above the roar of fire. The berserker and the last standing warrior threw themselves back into the corridor where they had emerged from moments ago. Kallan's fire growled like thunder as the orange and red flames rolled over the stone, leaving the dark one cowering behind her still-burning wall of flame. Kallan fled down the corridor, without a look back, into the darkness to Rune's cell. Behind the wall, Bergen and his men cowered as the stone grew hotter, but neither moved, knowing this Sidkona's skill. Sweat dripped into the berserker's mouth as he waited for the flames to die, all the while counting down the seconds lost.